another episode of the Roundtable Human Services Podcast. We're here with Lauren Wright. She is going to tell us all about her work. I'm especially excited about the way they're changing the vocabulary and the language of human services and how it's described among other people and within ourselves as a field. But before we jump into all that, and I get all excited, Lauren, will you please introduce yourself to our wonderful viewers?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. Again, my name is Lauren Wright, and I'm the Executive Director of Illinois Partners for Human Service. We are a coalition of health and human service organizations representing every county and every legislative district in Illinois. We do a lot of work around reframing human services, which I'm sure we'll get into, but we're a collective advocacy coalition, and we really focus on advocating for fair policies and equitable funding for human services from the state of Illinois. And so I joined about a little over 2 years ago. My background is actually in the nonprofit space, but was more in the international development space, doing coalition building.
Did you come in with a undergraduate experience in human services, or was it something else like international studies? Or explain to me how you got to the coalition part, because that is that's sort of an unknown territory in human services.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really speaks to the fact that policy advocacy in general is something we forget that is a huge and important part of human services. And so my background, actually, I started my undergrad, I majored in psychology and religion and was kind of on the social work route. So my first job was my first two jobs. I was a DSP, a direct support professional for a woman with severely advanced rheumatoid arthritis. So I was doing that job during the day. And then at night, I was working at an in-house drug and alcohol rehabilitation center for women. And so I really started in the social work realm and then kind of took a turn and volunteered in a rural community in West Africa, in Ghana. And that kind of sent my career trajectory in a totally different way. So I worked and volunteered in a children's center there, and then partnered with an organization called Mama Hope, and really just kind of stayed with that organization and worked my way up to director of programs. And that's where I began sort of building out our partnerships, which is an international coalition from, I think, about 8 different countries. And they were all community-based partnerships, all led by local leadership. And we worked on issues of gender equity, children and youth access to education and healthcare, and a whole other range of projects. And so that was a very broad coalition. And so that was really what led me then to apply for this position. When I left Mama Hope at the end of 2018, I had been kind of reckoning with this idea that what was I doing in my own country, in my own home community? And this job came along and I applied for it. And it was a really, it was an exciting opportunity. And now a lot of my coalition building experience that I had internationally, I now get to apply to the wonderful state of Illinois. And so it's been totally different, but very exciting. I still obviously have a lot to learn, but it's been really good.
So I'm curious, backtracking we have to give the disclaimer that there are some of us who are viewing this that are not in school, but we're human service passionate. And then there are some of us who are human service discipline. There's the difference. There's either you went to school in it or you just kind of jumped into it. For you, I'm really noticing like the coalition part, like the community part, the integration of learning how to work with the people around you and or whatever community you find yourself immersed in. So you went from working in a women's shelter at night, right, to working internationally. So and I'm using myself as an example because I was never the one who was like, let me think about which community I like to work with and then put myself in that situation. I've always been, I guess you could say, more policy framework mind, or like the rules don't make sense, let's mess them up kind of thing. So for those who are more community based, the coalition part, like how did you move from being involved in an undergraduate position of I'm working with women at night to an international position that then grew into a larger coalition? Like what the hell does coalition mean for you in your experience from one to the other?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. I think the best coalitions are powerful when they're informed by the experience of their stakeholders. And so to be able to
Say that
actually,
one more time. Say that one more time.
okay, the best coalitions are at their most powerful and they make the most impact when they are informed at that grassroots level from their stakeholders. And that is what really informed my experience because I think we like to create these dichotomies and these binaries in our mind where you're either doing direct service or you're doing policy advocacy, but you can't do both. And I don't think that's true or accurate. I think we actually make systemic change when the people who are experiencing um, the hardship or whatever they're experiencing on a day to day basis, they're informing policy change. And so, for those of you that are either studying human services or you're in the field and you're doing direct service, there's always a place for you in coalition building and in advocacy because collectively our power is that much stronger, particularly when it's informed by the people who are doing the work every day.
I love that so much. Thank you so much for reiterating that. That's one of those things I get so excited about. And it's so wonderful to meet other people who explain like that derivative, that darn line between like either you policy practice or you field practice. Like there has to be an integration between the two because there is no need for it to be one or the other. And granted, I was in a program that did delegate between the two of those things, right? You did nonprofit driven work and core stuff or field study. I'll call it field study. It wasn't called that, but it basically was that you're on the front lines or you're doing the paper pushing. And when I started, I was just like, oh yeah, like I definitely like I started in a girls' home. That was my first internship was at a girls' home. And I tell you, Lauren, the first day I was there, I learned that, oh my goodness, I don't want to be here. Like it was, I saw an interaction that I didn't think was appropriate. And that interaction was based on the rules and policies. So then I thought, ooh, maybe I signed up for the wrong side of this field. And then
Mhm.
I went back and forth and just annoyed the hell out of my teachers between like, do you want to do policy or do you want to do field work? I said, I want to fix the policies that affect field work and I want to be part of the field work because it influences policy. Like, why can't there be a middle ground? And what coalition means to me, and please correct me because I understand and recognize I'm a one-minded human individual in her own reality. That coalition is the essence of what it means to marry the rules and the regulation to the action and what is necessary. So you and what you as the director of the Illinois for Partners for Human Services does is you aren't out there saying, okay, human service providers, here's what you do. You say, okay, Illinois, and correct me if I'm wrong, here's what human service providers first off look like, what they need and what they need from you. Is that a good assumption? I hate assumptions, but a good assumption of what is on the surface of the message that you're giving to the state of Illinois with what your role
Yeah,
is.
in a lot of ways, I think what we're doing is amplifying the experiences, the voices, the work of community leaders and community-based organizations, and that requires a couple of things. It requires making sure that community-based human service providers have a seat at the table when those decisions are being made, but if we're actually doing our work from an equity lens, it's also ensuring that the people who receive these services and that the people who are working toward this on a day-to-day basis, that they don't just have a seat at the table, but they actually have that power in decision making. And so being that connector is a huge part of coalition building. But I often see the relationship between policy advocacy and community-based direct service as very cyclical. You can't, it's kind of a chicken and egg scenario. You need both. You can't have one without the other. And to be able to marry those two areas is something that I think our coalition, the work we do is only possible because of our coalition. And to be able to have that privilege to amplify their experiences is something that's a really wonderful part of my work. So,
So how are you helping the people who don't know squat about human services understand that what they're giving to isn't just another charity. It is a network of human service providers that does something greater than one entity allows. Like, there is a disconnect that we all follow in our practice. And I think in any field, there's a disconnect between the normal average person, and I don't mean it in the bad way, just the civilian who supports what they don't understand is a whole network of human service providers that isn't just the charity that they give down the street. It is a larger portion of the whole. How do
Mhm.
you how does your role and what you do provide to explaining and making that connection better?
Well, I think that comes down to reframing human services, which is actually an initiative out of the National Human Service Assembly in partnership with the Frameworks Institute. They did a very in depth research around what are public perceptions of human services. And I think, and how do we shift that, right? How do we shift the pity mindset that, oh, human services are only for those poor people over there? How do we change the language around how we describe human services in a way so people understand that human services are for all of us? And so we, and by we, I mean my organization. So my predecessor, who was the founding executive director of Illinois Partners, really had a huge role in this partnership. And she worked a lot with the Human Service Assembly and frameworks to really better understand what was this public perception and how do we shift it. And I think we can't blame people. We can't blame people for the way in which they understand human services when
Absolutely, I agree.
oftentimes as
Yeah.
providers, that's how we're describing our services, right? We have been taught that in order to raise more money, we have to share a narrative that's centered around pity. And that's not true, because what that does is you might get a one-time donation, but that doesn't actually sustain and create longevity for the sector. And that means speaking about our work and showing that it matters for everyone. And human services, not only do they matter for everyone, they affect all of us. They affect me. They affect my family. And a strong human service sector is integral to the health and well-being of our state. And I think COVID, as a pandemic, really amplified this, where we recognized that a robust public health response to a global pandemic requires a strong human service sector. There's no way we can appropriately respond to a public health crisis without giving people access to food, shelter, employment security, making sure that frontline workers have the support that they need, and that network, and making sure that we're able to show that value. It looks different in light of a global pandemic, but it's really important to talk about it in the way that it affects all of us and our well-being.
How is assessing and generating the sources for the needs of those that you work with in your network during COVID? Like, that might be a beating the horse question. You might have already have been asked this a million times,
No,
but how did that work for you as somebody who was not in charge, but look, you were I'm assuming people lean on you for those kind of initiatives, right? During a
yeah.
pandemic of all sorts.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think there's kind of an assumption that communities don't already know what they need, right? This idea that, and this goes back to the pity argument, is that when we think, oh, we have to help, what do I have to do? It's this, I think, in many ways, kind of a remnants of a patriarchal, in many ways, kind of capitalist system in which we think that there are the people who have and there are the people who have not. When in reality, community members know what they need. Community based organizations who are well connected and who understand the nuance and the intersection of need in their communities, they're willing to share it. And if you are, if the way I envision our role is being that bridge to make sure that those communities and those community based organizations have that platform in which to say what they need, and to communicate it clearly. And so the hardest part, I will say, of our job is synthesizing a very dynamic, diverse, um, complicated series of needs for an entire statewide sector. And that's definitely something that the needs in Southern Illinois are different than the needs in Chicago. And we have to be, we can't paint this broad brush, but we also need to be able to communicate what those are from a sector wide perspective. And so the one thing that we have seen as huge need across the sector has really been um, investments in the health and human services workforce and the pipeline to that workforce. And so that's something that we're really focused on in terms of our advocacy. But all that to say is community-based organizations, they know the needs of their communities. They just need to be connected to make sure that our elected officials understand what those needs are.
Lauren, you literally just nailed one of the most important aspects of our jobs on the head twofold. You are highlighting the fact that we understand what we need on even a small enough level as a community's sake, right? So much pressure is on us to face a pandemic or a food shortage or, God forbid, whatever could possibly happen that threatens us as a larger society. You in your position represent the capacity of smaller in just the sense of just little numbers alone. People who can handle their stuff, who can handle their muffins and like show up and do what is necessary for the community at large. You are setting a standard that the rest of at least the smaller entities, let's say each state could, you know, can mimic, can mirror. And I think that's phenomenal. So let's backtrack real quick. Let's say you're talking to somebody who is in university and they want to be in a position that's similar to yours. What practice or partaking am I investing in? Is it just volunteer work?
Well, I'll just say that Illinois Partners definitely isn't the only statewide entity. I think the best way to kind of create a well-functioning coalition is just to kind of have that background in community organizing and look at what the best community organizers are doing. And I think probably the hardest part of our job is most community organizers rightfully are organizing around an issue right there. And that's, I think, organizing is at its most effective when you're organizing around things like immigration, housing rights. These are all very, very effective tools in which you're organizing around a specific issue as opposed to a network. So I will say the difference that I found is that when we're trying to collectively understand, okay, how do we amplify our power? How do we make sure that we are speaking with one voice? It requires it all comes down to relationship building. That's really all that it is. It's all about building relationships with other organizations and shifting our mindset from, oh, that nonprofit over there is my competitor, to collaboration. And if we see ourselves and each other as competitors for scarce resources, it really inhibits our ability to collectively move the needle for the people that we advocate for. And
Do
so
you find that's a thing in community or a nonprofit sector, at least, that there's like a competition by?
I think there often can be, and it's not necessarily the fault of the nonprofits. I think the way nonprofits are funded instills this idea that, oh, there are scarce resources, and in order to access scarce resources, I have to prove why I'm better than you. And I think that that's a farce. I don't think that that's actually true. And I think I've learned from incredible leaders in my sector, and the ones who are the most effective see the interconnectedness of all different services. They recognize that childcare doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens with other types of family support, and it happens with job security, making sure that families as a unit have what they need. And you can't do that with just one service area. You need all the different services. And this speaks to the importance of how we talk about human services, how we understand it, how we're taught about it, how essential it is to just, because intuitively we can all recognize that Lauren, I'm a complex human being. I don't just need one thing. I don't just have one set of skills. I don't just, we're not siloed in how we interact with the world. And so why should our work be siloed? If we can so easily see the complexity of ourselves, we have to give that same respect and understanding to the complexity of the people that we work with, but also the complexity of our sector. And so it's something that we care a lot about and really want to make sure that we emphasize in our advocacy.
Let's get personal for a second. When you started off, whatever it was in undergrad that you found that led you here, like what was the procession? What was the experience? What was the human touch that you were like, oh, okay. So this is how I find myself wanting to be a leader in coalition forming and leading in that regard.
Yeah, well, I think if I had to like really go back to my origin, I learned everything I learned about leading with empathy from my mom. My mom is an incredible leader. I was raised in a very kind of progressive church environment that really valued social justice. And I think that that was something for me that inevitably shaped how I think about my role in the world and what I do to advance social justice. Now, I think that's evolved significantly as it does as we grow older. But I think for me, a lot of what I learned about leadership came from, my mom, and then in my work, really looking to community leaders around the world who effectively were able to understand and advocate for the needs of their communities. And I think that um, watching that unfold and being able to be a part of that was something that really I really admired, and that led me to this kind of a role.
Your position and what you do. Can you kind of describe in a nutshell what it is a coalition means to you, the importance of it, and any advice you would give to somebody who's interested in organizing the multitude of layers that involves coalition work?
Yeah, so I would just say if you're interested in creating or being a part of a coalition, as I mentioned earlier, relationship building is really important. To be able to do that effectively, it's important to listen first. We make a lot of assumptions about people, we make a lot of assumptions just inevitably about um, what people do, who they are. And so to be able to effectively build out a coalition, listening is one of the most important things you can do. Listening to whether that be your clients, your colleagues, those who you're looking to partner with. I think that that is a way to form a coalition. But in terms of what a coalition means to me, I described that earlier, which is around making sure that we're amplifying the voices of communities because communities know what they need.
This is the first conversation with Lauren Wright we're going to have, and we're definitely bringing her back because she's a powerhouse in what she does. And if you haven't noticed it, you will in our next conversation. I will see y'all next time in our next episode of National Human Services Roundtable Discussion Podcast. Thank you. You can find previous talks on our YouTube page. Just search NOHS organization and click subscribe. All of our social media handles can be found in the description box below. And of course, there is a ton more to learn and do on our website, nationalhumanservices.org.